Hi, I'm Radical Liberation from St. Louis, Missouri, self-declared King of the Moon, and we have Mad Mercenary.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
Hello.
Okay, and let's see, couple quick announcements. Little organized next week. Need to be this organized each time. The show next week will not be a mini because I'm going to have a guest on, and that's someone one of the folks I lined up when I went to the Mises Institute. I lined up several folks who agreed to be guests on the show, and this is a guy that I met at the Libertarian Scholars Conference in New York before all the conferences were shut down last year, so that would have been late 2019. And it really enjoyed meeting him, and it was a pleasure to see him again at this conference. And I think he is doing some great work. He actually presented 3 papers, I don't know. I saw 2 of them at the conference, and one of them really struck me as something that I think we're going to enjoy on the show. It's going to give us some insight on gold, Bitcoin. Anyway, don't want to give away too much, but I'm really looking forward to having him on. It'll just be me and him because Mad Merc won't be on that on our show this next week due to a conflict, but he will instead be on Cigar Stream, which is an excellent series. If you don't follow it, I strongly recommend you do. If you're my sort of person, then it's like just butter. It's great stuff. Meta politics, I think, is what he calls it. But it's the kind of thinking about things from a sort of deeper and more theoretical point of view. Anyway, the topic will be the Spanish Civil War. It'll be academic agent, apostolic majesty, mad mercenary. I don't know if there'll be others, but at least those 3. If you haven't caught it, I've been on Apostolic Majesty's channel twice, and really enjoyed both times and thought it was truly interesting stuff. So yeah, I guess nothing else to say about that, Mad Merc, except that this is one you feel is in your wheelhouse. So you were like, yes, get me in on that stream, right?
I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on the subject, but I have done a fair bit of reading on it. The amount of factions and the differing interests in that sort of conflict relates very much to what we see today. I won't give everything away, but I encourage people to go have a read of at least the different factions involved before starting the Cigar Stream.
Okay, cool. All right. Yeah, so I have a big topic today, which is a whirlwind lightning tour of history of economic thought. It's going to be fun. And boy, that first super chat anticipated me like you wouldn't believe. But we'll get to that in just a moment. First, I should have my screen share all set. Let me get that going.
Sorry, people are asking when that stream is. That is the 23rd UK time.
Right, 23rd, 9 p.m. 9
Yes.
p.m. UK time. Yeah. Okay, let's see. That's what I want to share. And let's move this over here. Okay, so we did just want to keep a little bit of an eye on this ball. We had previously done a show quite recently wondering if we're going to see hyperinflation or at least some significant inflation. And look at this. U.S. consumer prices post biggest gain in 8.5 years as economy reopens. Now, pause for a moment and just analyze the tenor of that title. Maybe I'm reading into it, Mad Merc, but I hear that and I think, oh, it's nice. The economy is reopening and prices are up. Wait, what? Usually we don't view U.S. consumer prices going up as a positive thing. And maybe I'm wrong, but I felt like the way they framed that as economy reopens almost made it sound like this is good or something.
Well, it depends on a certain point of view here. So if you are a Keynesian or of that ilk, obviously you believe that rising prices is a good thing. because obviously deflation and falling prices over time is, in the opinion of the
Terrible.
Keynesians, a terrible thing, and you go into depressions in that way. Again, we've addressed this before in the past. Please go look at other streams. But I think what you're seeing here is that as people have been locked down for longer and longer and longer, and we have printed so much money that now that they have, and putting aside the Cantillon effects of how the money is flowing down from the financial system to higher order goods, from higher order goods to lower order goods, now with the stimulus checks that the first Trump and then Biden administration gave directly to the people, bypassing the Cantillon effect, and people starting to get out and able to spend them on the general main street and not at specific targeted businesses that can work with the governments, such as Amazon or eBay, certain large online retailers. I think now that you're starting to see the majority of Main Street be affected by these prices, you're going to see that prices are going to continue to go up quite steeply.
Yeah. So look, they've got a little economic theory here. How cute. They say it rose. Prices rose by the most in more than 8.5 years in March as increased vaccinations and massive fiscal stimulus unleashed pent-up demand. Okay, the vaccinations, I could sort of see the story there. I'm a little unclear when they say stimulus unleashed pent-up demand. Well, what do you mean? If you hand people a bunch of money, then I guess they'll spend some of it. Is that unleashing pent-up demand? I'm not sure I'm buying that there.
I think the idea is that people have been locked up for so long that they have accumulated so much money and they have gone without for so long, or the theory suggests they've gone without.
That I agree, and that's the increased vaccinations. That's sort of what they're hinting at there is, life's going to go back to normal, and so people can spend again. But the massive fiscal stimulus unleashing pent-up demand, that's a funny way of putting it. Let's say that. I unleashed pent-up. I gave my child $500, and he went and bought something. I unleashed pent-up demand. What? That's a strange way of describing what just happened, right? But then it says, kicking off what most economists expect will be a brief period of higher inflation. So let's put a little bookmark on that brief period of higher inflation. They might be right. I have reason to believe they might be wrong. So we'll see. Let's see. Then also, it gets into the supply chain, which is what we've already been talking about. Showed a firming in underlying prices last month. Bumps against bottlenecks in the supply chain, capacity constraints, higher commodity prices. All right. So we've been talking about this. The supply chain, the higher commodity prices, the higher stages of production, and then the inflation in those higher stages of production working its way down to consumer prices, right? In this sense that the supply, those higher prices would result in less supply being available and potentially bidding up the prices of those consumer goods if people want them, right? So a lot of money from stimulus and maybe just not spending, as Mad Merck was saying, because people have been stuck at home. So a lot of money pouring out. So, high monetary demand going up against a restricted supply because these higher commodity prices are going to, and the supply chain are going to result in less stuff to spend all that money on, right? And so, inflation that maybe won't be brief. We'll see. Anyway, I didn't know articles like this. I don't tend to read the financial press, engage in so much casual economic theorizing, much of which looks to be half-assed, So
the unfortunate part about the financial pages of most major publications is that they're written by people who have taken courses or know the financial markets, but they don't have an underlying economic theory. And so they just do a quick Google search and they fall back on the mainstream narrative.
Right.
And they come off looking very foolish most of the time because they make statements of something that they pretty much obviously have no idea what it is.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the impression I'm
like
getting.
most journalism.
Right. Yeah, we see this in other areas. Anyway, any other comments on that? I didn't want to spend a bunch of time on it. Just kind of keep people's eye on that inflation ball.
Yeah, I think it's better to characterize this as a inflation snowball because I think you're going to start to see it ramp up a little bit. It may not be immediate. I'm not saying it's going to be like tomorrow we're going to have hyperinflation, but just keep your eye on it.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Just saw from my guest. Might as well tell you guys, since we were talking about the show next week. We'll move it an hour earlier to his convenience because he's on the continent, the European continent. So we'll be 1 hour earlier next week. All right. Okay. Well.
No, I'm really glad I'm not on that stream. That would be 5 or 6 a.m. for me.
Super early for you. That's true. Yeah. Okay. So here's the task I set myself. I felt like talking about history of economic thought. That is the economists, in essence, or people in an economics mode who maybe didn't have economists as their title, because the whole notion of being an economist is actually quite modern. It used to be just a little portion of moral philosophy, natural philosophy being what we think of usually as the sciences, right? Physics and things like that. Moral philosophy being thinking about man, right? So anything like the social sciences would fall under moral philosophy, including economics. So actually, let me switch to this. So here's my thinking. I am not going to try to be exhaustive, obviously, with 700 years of history of economic thought. But what I thought I could do that would be perhaps useful and interesting is hit on some important figures and tell you about a little bit of what they contributed. But in particular, rather than trying to be comprehensive, like I said, and tell you, everything each of these figures thought about economics or something like that, we don't have time for that. I thought I'd try to give you a little taste of one of their contributions. And in that way, you get a little teaser for each of these guys, maybe intrigue you a little bit. So, for example, Mad Merck already mentioned the Cantillon effect or Cantillon effect. I never know which way to pronounce his name. I'm going to go with the French pronunciation. Cantillon effect. That is actually what I chose to highlight from Richard Cantillon. And so I'll actually share with you about the Cantillon effect, and that'll give you a taste for Cantillon. There's much more to him. I'd recommend that you read Cantillon. There's not a lot to read, and it's tremendous. But I'll give you a little teaser, right? And so on and so forth with some of these other guys. I'm going to start a little bit different, though, with the Scholastics. These are Spanish monks. Well, anyway, I'll tell you in a moment, because I wrote 2 articles on this almost 20 years ago now. And they're not very long, and they're pretty much exactly what we want, a little introduction to the thinkers. So I'm just going to read my articles. I mean, they're my articles, so I can do it. This is a book review of that I did in 2 parts because it's pretty meaty book. And so I did it over 2 articles for Mises.org for their Mises Daily article. So I'll read and maybe pause to comment, and Mad Merck, of course, jump in whenever you like. So Christianity's Free Market Tradition, published in July 2003 by me. Some of my Christian friends, see if this sounds familiar from anyone who hangs out on Twitter or in our sort of right-wing or trad circles. Some of my Christian friends are suspicious of my interest in economics. They see economics as a product of Enlightenment rationalism, along with deism, atheism, the chaos of the French Revolution, and other unchristian aspects of the modern age. So I am greatly pleased to be able to direct them to the just reissued edition of Alejandro A. Chaffoin's Faith and Liberty, the Economic Thought of the Late Scholastics. This short book deals exclusively with the pre-Enlightenment scholastics who were primarily members of religious orders in Spain. These men built on the work of Thomas Aquinas from after his death in the late 13th century, so that's the 1200s we're starting here, up to the mid-17th century, up to the 1600s. Those of us who know some economics are used to wincing when the typical clergyman makes a pronouncement on political economy. To be fair, historians, philosophers, politicians, and journalists tend to be just as self-confidently inept. So it comes as a bit of a shock to read these religious figures, avowedly concerned first and foremost with justice and biblical standards, and find that not only are they economically literate, but that in many cases their economic theory was far more advanced than many professional economists who came after them. And you can just imagine if someone didn't tell him the source of it and sat there and started telling Pope Francis about some of the things that these scholastics said, and you just imagine his face turning red or something, right? But these were great, great Catholic thinkers. In fact, these men cannot be fairly considered by economists as only moralists. Their brilliant economic analysis earns them a place as founders of economics. One might be tempted to call them the true Adam Smiths, except that their economic analysis was superior to the confused Adam Smith of The Wealth of Nations. I've decided to be very positive today, by the way. I have a paper on the Scottish Enlightenment, and I write about David Hume and Adam Smith and some of their economics and stuff. And I spend quite a bit of time slamming Smith. But today is not for that sort of thing. We're not going to talk about Adam Smith and Karl Marx and people like this. We're going to talk about what I think are some of the best thinkers in economics, and only deliver glancing blows to Adam Smith just for fun. Okay, so first on property. This is Francisco de Vitoria, who lived between 1480 and 1546. He said, "Evil men will take more and add less to the barn of the common goods." You might know that little quote is summarized as the tragedy of the commons now, right? The scholastics saw the benefit of private property. Thomas de Mercato wrote in 1571, "We can see that privately owned property flourishes, while city and council-owned property suffers from inadequate care and worse management. If universal love won't induce people to take care of things, private interest will." By the way, I just got to share, I don't know that I've ever shared this on the show. I'm amazed I haven't. Share one of the most stark moments of seeing that, where he says privately owned property flourishing, city or council-owned property suffering. I lived in Manhattan in 1994 for a summer, and I was in at a certain subway stop, and the tunnel leading up was the typical, covered in gum and concrete and just disgusting. I found the Manhattan subway useful, but not aesthetically pleasing, shall we say. And then as we exited out, it became like beautiful. It was like tiled floor and colorful and clean. And I was like, what is this? And then I found out that this opened up into like a mall or something like that. And that little part that I had just stepped foot on was privately owned. And literally you could see the line between the publicly managed and the privately managed, walkway. And the privately managed was wonderful, and the publicly managed was disgusting. So anyway, I'll never forget that. I should have taken a picture. It was remarkable. Domingo de Banez cited two major benefits from the division into private property. We know, quote, "We know that the fields are not going to be efficiently tilled in common ownership, and that there will not be peace in the republic. So we see that it is convenient to undertake the division of goods." Noting the case in Genesis 13, where dividing land between Abraham and Lot ended a quarrel, Leonard Lessio argued that private property encouraged peace between men. Father Bede James, in his analysis of the schoolmen's theories of private property, concludes that for them, the right to property was an absolute right that no circumstances could ever invalidate. And then I'll say I will discuss in a subsequent article how they nevertheless saw limits to the exercise of this absolute right. Juan de Mariana also saw the beneficial results of exchange of property. If the exchange of goods were abolished, society would be impossible. Scarcity can be overcome through mutual exchange of those items owned in abundance by one party or the other. So that's the Scholastics on private property. I particularly draw your attention to Father B. James saying the right to property is an absolute right that no circumstances could ever invalidate. That is pretty strong language, right? Seems pretty hardcore. Okay, public finance. Juan de Mariana again, whose name is, I believe, one of the names of the Scholastics that's up in the sort of honored names that are in the at the Mises Institute in a certain room. You can see these names that stick out from the wall. And in fact, my brother-in-law painted those letters through a strange coincidence. But anyway, taxes are commonly a calamity for the people and a nightmare for the government. For the former, they are always excessive. For the latter, they are never enough, never too much. Juan de Mariana. So the Scholastics' analysis of the fruitfulness of the exchange economy led them to be harsh critics of profligate public finance. Diego de Saavedra Fajardo, I hope no Spanish speakers are listening to me butcher these names, recommended that budgets should be balanced by cutting spending because power is mad and has to be restrained by economic prudence. Now, this connects with what we were just talking about last week, namely, we were talking about the pandemic and the effects on the government of the stimulus, the huge amounts of money that the central banks have been pouring out, I guess, to try to combat the effects of the pandemic or something like that. And what were the results is as our author pointed out last week, Jesus Huerta de Soto, what are the results? It's that any measures that governments might have been feeling the pinch on, feeling like, maybe we need to start economizing a bit, be a bit more efficient. All that went absolutely out the window because basically they just are getting money shoveled at them, right? And this is exactly what Fajardo says here. Power is mad and has to be restrained by economic prudence. Well, the central banks are killing economic prudence. As little as we get from our governments, there's like nothing now, right? Chafuin writes of Pedro Fernandez Navarrete, discarding the notion that abundance of currency denotes wealth, Navarrete defined a rich province as a productive one. He states that productivity is hampered when producers have to pay high taxes and cope with rampant inflation. The origin of poverty is high taxes. As King Teodorico said, the only agreeable country is one where no man is afraid of tax collectors.
I think this is where the unique national traditions of each country actually comes into it. So obviously we have the beginnings of private recognized by law private property with the formation of as in substantial, with the recognition of the Magna Carta after the rebellion against King John. The Dutch, obviously, being after the 80 Years' War against the Spanish and Habsburg, they obviously have a very strong private property tradition. I think this comes down to the fact that unique histories actually can create a situation where private property is held more as a core value. I often think of the English sort of saying, "Every man's home is his castle." And I think that's very much ingrained in the English and by extension the empire and how they think. And I think that these sorts of the early days were how it was all the thoughts were formulated. Excuse me one moment. My dog is going insane.
Yeah, I'll just, I meant to read this before starting the articles. I love it that Base Batusai anticipated where I was going to go here. He said, I can't catch this stream live, so I will take the opportunity to show Alejandro Chafuin's book, Faith and Liberty, and your two wonderful articles on Mises Institute. They're must-reads, in my opinion, and that's why I'm reading them. So thank you, sir, for a generous super
Apologies.
chat there.
My train of thought was heavily distracted by that. I apologize.
I bet.
Sucks.
Yeah, you were talking about national traditions and about private property. Yeah, the story in Europe overall is one that is good, because that is how we really get the rise of Europe. As in the last several hundred years, and Europe becoming so powerful across the world and everything. It's because overall private property was, relative to other parts of the world, private property was relatively unmolested. Having said that, I think what you're getting into is you can tell a quite different story as you go from place to place in Europe, right?
This is correct.
Where there's a stronger tradition, or historical circumstances, as you pointed out, made them sort of reinforce the property tradition because they felt under threat by foreign powers, or even their own government, right? Like in the case of King John.
This is correct, and another example I would point out, and we're actually going to be doing 2 shows on this topic, so people please don't flood us with comments. We already have it planned. Genoa and Venice are obviously the 2 great examples of history that we can point to, where Genoa was mostly private-led, whereas Venice was mostly actually state-led, with private enterprise backing up the state. And we see how each of them actually differed from one another. And even though Genoa is in an objectively worse position geographically than Venice, they were still able to be very much competitive against Venice, who took a very different model. And we have to be careful on which is focused on, because we often hear of Genoa and Venice in the same sentence, but what's often talked about is actually Venice, and what historians focus on, and how people kind of focus on Venice and don't talk about Genoa too much, and how it was really Genoa's privately led society, and the Council of Merchants and this sort of thing that helped it become a major power in Europe.
Okay, so return to the article. Marianda indicates the attitude of the scholastics towards inflation as a method of public finance. Attend, right? This is our world that he's speaking to right now. He describes a desperate ruler looking for unusual means to pay his expenses. It is not rare for the iniquitous and equally useless suggestion of altering the value of money to be whispered in the king's ear. Such means, considered from every perspective, are and always will be plunder. If money has come to be a general medium of exchange, it is precisely because of its stability of value, subject to only a few oscillations in times of great crisis. What a great passage, right? Hardcore, and he points exactly to the problem, right? You're screwing up what made us want to use the money in the first place when you start inflating the money, right? Namely that it had this stability of value.
Yes, and this is in a time where the currency was actually the physical raw product of whatever it was. It was actually silver dollar. It was actually silver shillings, gold pounds, guineas, all this sort of stuff. Which actually brings me onto the topic of decimalization and why it's stupid, but I guess that's a topic for another show. But when we're talking about devaluation here, we're actually talking about reducing the actual content of the primary metal. So whether that be silver, gold, copper, whatever, actually reducing the product. In fact, this happened with Henry VIII.
That's in the old days. That's how they do it, right? And that's why we have I don't know. Is this true in other countries, Madmerk? The little ridges around the edge of the coin sometimes? It goes back to a tradition.
This is correct.
Yeah, it goes back to a tradition of or to the coin clipping and trying to show, hey, this coin didn't have its edges shaved or whatever, because we saw the little ridges are still there, right?
This is correct. So throughout Europe, for those who don't know, so I'll use the United Kingdom for an example, but this applies to the rest of Europe because they just have different names. The common sort of total value of pennies was 240. Now, for all of the mathematicians in the audience, you'll immediately perk it can be divided in more ways than any of the numbers below it. So this prime number was chosen actually by Charlemagne, not the person in chat, the actual Charlemagne, to be the standard for money. And 240 pennies in weight is equal to exactly whatever the coin in gold would be. So it's actually not only a number system, but it's an actual weight system. So if you had, I don't know, 333 pennies, you could put it on a scale and you could get shillings in the same exact weight. There's no need to count it all out. Again, why decimalization is stupid. It's actually a very efficient system, a very well thought out system. And back in the days when you devalued currency like that, what you would do is you would remove the content of whatever the primary metal is. And this happened to such a extent that in the United Kingdom under Henry VIII, that his nickname was Old Copper Nose, because the silver shillings were actually pretty much, by the end of his reign, only silver plated, and underneath was copper. And eventually the silver would rub off, and the first thing to rub off, because if you think about where your fingers go on a coin, it's the center of the coin, and that would be the first place that rubs off, and that's where the nose is, and you would be able to see the copper underneath. So that's how he got his name, Old Copper Nose.
That's great. Okay, give me just a sec. Speaking of Charlemagne, he asked me to...
My mistake. Sorry. Correction. Primary numbers is one that can't be divided. Ergo, 240 is not a prime number. Are you sure about that, JG? I'm pretty sure it can.
Okay, anyway, let's keep
rolling. 240 is a very useful number for coinage. It's very useful. It can be divided in many ways.
So the Scholastics on inflation gets even better. Okay, now moving into money. Saavedra Fajardo also recommended that the prince refrain from altering the value of money. Coins are like young girls, he says. It is an offense to touch them. Okay. If you guys aren't inspired by that, I put it in the chat. If you guys aren't inspired for some memes with that, I don't know what to do. I mean, come on. This Spanish monk just connected central banking to like pedophilia. You know, I mean, that's great. Okay, so we gotta use this.
So just hands up in the chat, like press 1 if you want that on a shirt, because I think that's a shirt material.
It is an offense to touch them. I love it. Okay, so Chaffin writes that De Soto, like his Spanish colleagues, explained the nature and origin of money in Aristotelian terms and observed that the construction of a house cannot be estimated in terms of shoes, socks, or other manufactured goods. Calculation is impossible without money, a unit of measurement. Although De Soto said that money could be made of many different materials, he preferred gold coins. So back to me now. This amazing insight into the essential role of money as a means for rational economic calculation, a point we now associate with Mises, was not the end of the Scholastics' insight into this central aspect of a market economy. Chaffin notes that Martin de Azpilcueta provided what many authors considered to be the first formulation of the quantity theory of money. Money is worth more where and when it is scarce than where and when it is abundant. As noted previously, the Scholastics seem to share little of the magical thinking of so many modern economists about inflation. Mariana saw currency debasement as a form of taxation.
Which it is. It's tax on your savings.
Which it is. Exactly, right. So hopefully you guys are starting to get why I was excited to talk about these guys. I mean, they're based, they're red-pilled, they get it, okay? They totally get it. Their analysis is good, and they go further from that analysis, and they name the bad guys, right? Okay, so international trade. Vittoria claimed that eternal, natural, and positive human law favors international trade. To abjure it would violate the golden rule. Okay, so listen to this. The Scholastics were strong in their support of free trade. Teofilo Ordonez stated, that no one has realized, at least up to now, that Vittoria's vision of the right to free communication and unrestricted foreign relations represents an explicit advance of the principles of economic neoliberalism and worldwide free market. Bartolomé de Albornoz, man, I'm butchering these names, spoke movingly in praise of the exchange of goods with foreign merchants. It is more immutable and less subject to variations and alterations than other parts of civil law. Buying and selling is the nerve of human life that sustains the universe. By means of buying and selling, the world is united, joining distant lands and nations, people of different languages, laws, and ways of life. If it were not for these contracts, some would lack the goods that others have in abundance, and they would not be able to share the goods that they have in excess with those countries where they are scarce. Great stuff. I mean, this is accomplishing just what I hoped, giving you enough of a taste that I hope you get sparked, a little bit of an interest sparked. In fact, remind me, once I finish going through these, I want to share a link to Chaffwin's book in case anyone is so inspired. Value and price. The scholastic definition of just price was the price determined or established by common estimation in the market. One of the areas that marks the scholastics as more sophisticated than the classical economists who came after them is their value and price theory. Chaffwin writes that nearly all the elements of modern value and price theory figure in the writings of the medieval schoolmen. Though they believed in an objective value based on natural order, in which animate creatures like roaches are higher than inanimate things like gold, they recognized that there was another scale of value based on utility, what we would now call subjective value. They saw that prices were related to subjective value, not objective value, and were affected by scarcity. St. Bernardino's explanation of the influence of scarcity on prices resolves the paradox of value. Water is usually cheap where it is abundant, but it can happen that on a mountain or in another place, water is scarce, not abundant. It may well happen that water is more highly esteemed than gold because gold is more abundant in this place than water. So yeah, he says you're up on a mountain, you're in a desert. Suddenly, you'd rather have the water than the gold, right? Because the water is the thing that's scarce. And thus, he explains what's called the paradox of value. We can't live without water. But we can live without diamonds. So why should diamonds have a higher price than water? Or the same weight of diamonds versus the same weight of water. Well, he explains it right here, right? For the schoolmen, value in exchange depends on value in use. Nonetheless, this value in use is not an objective quality. The scholastic utility theory of value must be understood as a subjective one. In effect, the schoolmen were the forerunners of the late 19th century economists who discovered the subjective theory of value. Now, on profit. Based on their insightful price theory, the scholastics had an acute analysis of profits. They argued that profits come from buying and selling at just prices, and that if it is legal to lose, it must be legal to win. Thank you. I wish more people would have that simple insight, right? You see so much, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez types, look at all those profits. We should seize them. And it's like, okay, well, are you going to share in the losses, lady? Then we can talk. Then we can have a conversation. Okay. Therefore, since businessmen keep their profits when they sell at a gain, when they suffer a loss, they must not transfer it to the buyers, the consumers, or to the republic. One can imagine what they would have thought of farm subsidies, infant industry protections, bailouts, etc. Mariana wrote that those who, foreseeing the demise of their business, cling to the magistrate's authority as a shipwrecked person to a rock, and attempt to alleviate their difficulties at the cost of the state are the most pernicious of men. All of them must be rejected and avoided with extreme care. Wow, nail in the bailouts hundreds of years before they happened. Beautifully put. Okay, conclusion of this article, and then I'm going to go right into the second article. Chaffwin's excellent book contains many more examples of the sophistication of scholastic economic analysis. In the next article, I will describe how the scholastics' public policy recommendations and ethical teachings integrated their understanding of the market. It is probably too much to ask that the clergy of today be as sophisticated as the scholastic economic analysts, but at least Chaffwin gives me the ammunition to answer my Christian friends who are suspicious of economics. In being ignorant of economics, they are not only ignoring a great secular science, but their own Christian heritage. Okay, I don't think I've shown a link to this article, so here is article number 1. And I'll just go ahead and share them right next to each other. Here's article number 2 that I'm now going to go through. Okay, so continuing on, profits versus society, must we choose, is part 2 of my review of Chaffwin's book from July 2003. When today's clergymen expound on issues of political economy, we are often given a stark choice. Will we allow companies to selfishly pursue profits, or will they recognize a wider social mission? Will workers be paid the barely subsistent market wage, or will they be paid a more Christian living wage? Even conservative Christian voices now tell us that we must choose between a rigid market orthodoxy and compassionate conservatism. For those of us who understand economics, it sounds like we must choose between being heartless and a vain attempt to suspend the universal laws of economics. I'm going to talk about the trad caths and such in just a moment. In a previous article, I summarized, blah, blah, blah. We can turn with relief from the ignorant moralizing prevalent today to the teachings of the late scholastics, whose commitment to biblical justice and Christian mercy was informed by a profound understanding of economic truth. So you all may not know, but as someone mentioned in the comments, Tom Woods is like a Latin Mass Catholic, you know. He actually wrote about the Latin Mass and stuff like this. He wrote a book called The Church and the Market, which is outstanding. Even if you don't care about the Catholic Church at all, it would be a great way to be introduced to economics. I'm serious about that. I've read the book and it's excellent. I think mine's is filled with underlines. He basically teaches you economics in the guise of addressing the church, you know, but also addresses the church. Anyway, it's just fabulous. I'll tell you who wasn't happy with it: Catholics. If you've been around our right-wing conservative trad circles long enough, then you probably have run into some people who like to cite, Admir, can you help me? Shoot, what's his name? He goes on about usury all the time. He's been on YouTube. Maybe they've kicked him off by now. And he sort of has a lot to say about Jews. What's his name? Come on, guys.
Sorry. Can you give me, is he a YouTuber or?
No, I can get it because I have his book title in my head. I actually have several of his books. I read several of them years ago.
Just while you're looking that up, I did make a mistake there, and I would like to correct it. I believe, because going back with JG, he is correct. It's not a prime number. I think it's a highly composite number. But there is a special factor about 240. Yes, other way. There is a special factor about. Yeah, there's a very special factor about 240 that allows it to be divisible in many different ways. That helps with the ability for people to actually trade. Sorry, wanted to correct that. Now,
makes sense. That makes more sense. Okay, E. Michael Jones. That was the name I was looking for. E. Michael Jones is a poster child for this sort of thing. He has a whole book on usury, and so forth. Anyway, Tom Woods got viciously attacked by his fellow like Latin Mass Catholic types, you know, the trad cats. I remember reading some of his essays, trying to explain to them that, you know, whereas the Pope, you know, the church recognizes that the Pope can pronounce on certain matters. He does not have like, you know, special holy protection when he pronounces on just some random topic, right? So for the example he gives is, when the Pope talks about architecture, he could maybe talk about, you know, what the meaning of a church should be, and you know, that the church should, you know, rise our, you know, help us see the transcendence of God and the way it's designed, and so on and so forth, right? And that's all well and good, and within his sphere, right? But if he starts to say, you know, I want you to make those beams out of glass because I think that's going to be great. And the architect says the glass is going to shatter once we put load bearing, you know, try to use it as a load bearing beam. You know, once he starts talking about something like that, he's off the reservation, right? He doesn't get any ex cathedra holy power or something like that to be accurate on a topic like that. And the same applies to economics. In as much as he says something like, you know, we ought to be compassionate towards people, we ought to be just in our dealings, you know, all these sorts of things. He's just repeating things the Bible said, right? When he starts telling you, that you should pass a law, a living wage, minimum wage law, right? because it'll help poor people. Well, at that point, he's off the reservation. The economists can say, actually, it hurts poor people. Let me explain to you why, right? So because they were hurling these accusations that Tom Woods was like being a heretic by talking about free market economics, and that's ridiculous. Anyway, if you have an interest, I think Church and the Market is the book to read by Tom Woods. Go ahead.
I think we'll probably have to do another stream, because actually one of our first streams was, does the free market cause degeneracy? I think we'll probably have to do a follow-up stream to that. Reason being is that I think we're starting to see, again, with the way some people are starting to think, or have thought for a long time perhaps, they're adopting positions that are just not economically logical. For like, and it's very emotionally driven in a lot of cases, in my opinion, just confusing barter and trade and condemning it all as sinful and evil and usury and what have you, because it's based on greed or material gain or whatever. And yes, I get we're Christians there. I don't think that's spoiling anything. So we do understand the position that they're coming from, but I don't agree with it.
Right.
I think that's probably something we're going to have to do another stream on. But
okay, so now returning to the topic of property, which I had covered in the first article from a certain point of view. Now we're going to sort of take this article focuses a little more on like the ethics of economics, right? The Scholastics not only rejected widespread common ownership of goods, socialism, as unworkable, but also noted its effect on virtue. Soto wrote that in a context of commonly owned goods, the virtue of liberality would disappear since, quote, those who own nothing cannot be liberal. Private property, then, is an important enabling condition for the practice of a number of virtues. The virtues of charity, liberality, hospitality, and generosity would all become impossible in a world without private property. Now, I've seen people make this point. I think it's very important. And I think when we look at places where communism has been seriously tried, you know, the early Soviet Union, early Bolshevik period of the Soviet Union, and so forth, you see, in fact, this very problem. You can't be generous when you don't own anything. You know? In a beautiful passage, Tomás de Mercado even connects property to the greatest of Christian virtues. Common ownership is counterproductive because people love most those things that belong to them. If I love God, it is my God, creator and savior, whom I love. If I love him who engendered me, it is my Father whom I love. If a father loves his children, it is because they are his. If a wife loves her husband, it is because he belongs to her, and vice versa. And if I love a friend, it is my friend or my parent or my neighbor. You might want to mute, Mad Merc, you're moving around or something. If I desire the common good, it is for the benefit of my religion or my country or my republic. Love always involves the word mine, and the concept of property is basic to love's nature and essence. I can't imagine my nationalist friends being unhappy with this passage, right? It's lovely. To those who objected that private property did not resolve all the evils in society, Domingo de Soto responded with solid, non-utopian common sense. Soto further stated that there is no law which can prevent men from using their freedom in disorderly fashion. Although the institution of private property promotes peace and equality, it cannot guarantee the abolition of evil. So this is, I think, part of the problem I see. People are unhappy with, a free market or a private property order because it doesn't instantly turn everyone into angels or something, but no one who's really thought about it has claimed that. Mad Mert? Okay, yeah. Okay, extreme need.
Sorry. Were you wanting me to come in there? I thought you were asking me to mute.
Picking up some noise, yeah. Okay, extreme need. A common question put to advocates of private property is some variation of the emergency situation in which someone's life or liberty seems to hang on violating property rights. A typically contrived example is this. You accidentally fall off a high building but catch a hold of someone's flagpole. Can they require you to let go of their private property? Yes, libertarians sit around and talk about geeky stuff like this. But anyway, roll with it because I love how the scholastics deal with it. The point of such questions usually seems to be to use an edge case to throw the whole principle of private property into doubt. In a section new to this edition of Chaffooin's book, Chaffooin summarizes the scholastic principle of extreme need that addresses these kinds of cases. Distinguishing between ownership, dominion, we would say, and use, the scholastics argued that, quote, even in case of necessity, when individual property might be lawfully seized in the name of another's hunger or of the common good, yet the owner's right to property remained and endured. Okay. Now, is this a meaningless distinction? This is where the Britisher starts talking about angels dancing on the head of a pen or whatever. No, it's not. Watch carefully. Though a person in extreme need might ethically make use of someone else's property, they ought not to simply steal it. Martin de Azpilcueta wrote that he who takes something in extreme need is obliged to make restitution when he has a chance, independently if he has goods in another place or not, and even if he had or had not consumed the goods. Right? So you follow. You hang on the flagpole and it saves your life, but you kind of crack the flagpole. They would say, well, you probably ought to replace the flagpole for the guy, right? Your extreme need doesn't mean that you get to just steal from anybody, right? It's a temporary use of something that is owned by someone else, and you make it up to them, right? So this is not a license to fleece the rich. That the rich have an obligation to give to the poor in grave need, and that the latter cannot take these goods by themselves can be understood because it is an obligation of charity, not of justice, and the poor cannot be the judges of those cases. And I'm just going to pop in a little bit of my own biblical scholarship here. After learning about classical libertarian stuff, I read through the Bible, which I've done a number of times, but I read through the Mosaic Law with all this in mind. And I think I took a bunch of notes. I don't know if I could ever find them. And what I was particularly looking for is, is the Mosaic Law incompatible with, the non-aggression principle and stuff like that. And it was quite surprising what I noticed looking at it with that eye. There's punishment for crimes in the Mosaic Law, which seem quite harsh to our ears, right? In some cases. But, and there are passages about being charitable. But there are no punishments for not being charitable. I don't know if I'd ever heard anyone mention that, but I noticed it, and I studied the whole law carefully, looking for this. There is never a punishment for not being charitable, not a punishment under law. Now, there's times when God sort of judges people, right? But even then, he doesn't say you weren't charitable. It says, you abused orphans and widows, you stole from people who were desperately poor, and you took their stuff, and so now I'm gonna punish you, right? But even then, I don't think any of those judgments talk about, you just weren't charitable enough, and so the might of God is going to come down on your head. So anyway, interesting. Now, for those who even find this exception of property rights dangerous, Chaffooin defends the scholastic view in this way. God created visible goods so that humans can live by their use. The division of goods can never abolish this first destiny of material goods. Rights to life and liberty are, in a sense, superior to property rights. In extreme cases, when these rights seem to be in contradiction, life and liberty should prevail. The person who benefited from these goods has the obligation to restitute, which proves that it is not the domain, but the use that changes hands. So I think that's brilliant. That's actually my favorite part of these two articles, is that section on extreme need. And it shows how carefully they're thinking through these things. Okay, a couple more things to finish up with the scholastics, and then we'll move on. Woohoo, got a lot more to cover. But this is like the first 400 years I wanted to cover, so we're actually moving fast from a certain point of view. Okay, price gouging. Due to their understanding of the importance of a freely functioning price system, the scholastics did not have today's typical reaction to high prices charged in extreme situations. The medieval schoolmen declared that it was legitimate to charge a high price for bread in times of universal famine, or to ask a very high price for medicine in times of universal plague. And Cantillon stated categorically that merchants do not have to serve our comfort for free. The scholastics were not unsympathetic to the lot of the poor in extreme situations. They simply understood enough economics to know that price ceilings and other interventions only made things worse. If justice and equity require a price increase that will incidentally hurt the poor, their interests must be protected by other means. They must be helped with alms rather than with sales, meaning maximum prices. And in times of scarcity and hunger, the poor can rarely buy the wheat at the official below market price. On the contrary, the only ones who can buy at that price are the powerful and the public ministers, the public servants, because the owner of the wheat cannot resist their requests. What great insight. This is exactly what happens. When you get price controls, it ends up being who you know, right? So what their advice is, think about crisis situations. Like we had a taste of that near the beginning of the pandemic last year, right? But think about natural disaster type situations. That's where there's these price gouging laws come into effect. They're saying don't screw with the price system because, as has been well explained on Mises.org, this means that you're not letting the signals flow through the economic system. Suddenly there's a natural disaster. We need, water, drinkable water, right? In this area, New Orleans after the flood or something like that, right? Well, you want those prices to go up to signal to everybody, get that drinkable water to New Orleans, darn it. I don't care that you're 5 states away. Get in the truck, load it up with water and get it down. It'll be we'll make it worth your while. But then you could help people by giving them money to help them buy the temporarily expensive water. That's their advice. So don't screw up the price system with price gouging laws. Just be charitable to those in need.
The other part of this is that it's how much you actually could take a loss. So, for example, if you gave the water away for free and you took a loss on a financial loss on the water, the bigger that financial loss, it could be a bigger signal to say how much need there was for that good.
Mm-hmm. So, in stark contrast to much economic reasoning today, the merchant was recognized by the scholastics as having rights as well. Molina added that the cost of what the Republic demands for the common good must be borne collectively by all citizens, and it would be unjust to place the burden upon the owners of the wheat only. So, yeah, there's a big crisis. We need this. You don't just rob the one guy who happens to have the thing everybody needs, right? We all need it. And we should all share the burden. So great, just such good stuff here. So eminent domain. The scholastics grounded their understanding of value in subjective estimation, so they would have little patience for the arguments now used to justify eminent domain takings. So long as they make someone sell his property by force, it does not matter if they give him a price 10 times higher than its value, its current price. They are not giving him its value. The same happens in the buying process. If they force someone to buy something he does not want, although they give him the object for 10 times less than its value. Lobbyists. Just as the classical economists, the scholastics understood monopoly as primarily a product of government privilege, and they saw this as an abuse. In the field of economic ethics, Molina reasoned that the king or the republic that grants privileges in a way that harms its subjects is committing a mortal sin, as are those who ask for such privileges or make use of them. If Molina's ethical analysis is correct, then there will certainly have to be a special circle in hell for lobbyists. And now the living wage, and we'll be about done here. So the living wage, you've heard of that, right? This collected the living wage idea long before it was called that. The owner is only obliged to pay him the just wage for his services, not what is sufficient for his sustenance, and much less for the maintenance of his children and family. This insistence on the justice of freely negotiated wages derived from the scholastic understanding that a wage is a price for labor, just like rent is a price for housing. Therefore, the just prices for labor are determined through the free interplay of market exchanges, just as other prices are. De Soto stipulated that if they freely accepted this salary for their job, it must be just. De Soto advised them, if you do not want to serve that salary, leave. Again, the scholastics did not lack concern for those in unfortunate circumstances. They simply understood that attempts to suspend the functioning of the price system would not help, and would indeed hurt one of the great hopes for all workers. The protection of private property, the promotion of trade, the encouragement of commerce, the reduction of superfluous government spending and taxes, and a policy of sound money were all destined to improve the condition of the workers. They recommended private charity as a way to alleviate the sufferings of those who could not work. According to the late scholastics, and in agreement with the Holy Scriptures, the rich are under obligation to help the poor. Among the solutions proposed by the scholastics, we can find recommendations to feed the poor instead of feeding dogs, ouch, and to give to the needy, instead of buying luxury goods. So I hope you see that they are threading the needle here, right? They do not reject economics to be ethical. They recognize that economics teaches us how the world inevitably works. And if you fight against it, you're just going to end up hurting more people than you help. Instead, let the price system, for example, do its thing. Let people own their property. Don't steal from them, right? Recognize all these things, and then do the Christian thing and be charitable with your justly owned goods. We have seen policy become a substitute for charity. In particular, I've noticed that people who advocate, they've done studies of this, people who advocate for a wider forced redistribution of goods and all that, they tend to have not be very charitable. Some of these people are like politicians, and we have access. It's public record what their charitable giving is and stuff, and it's pathetic. The people who are supposedly heartless and cruel and advocates of the market often are very charitable privately. I know that. Things I shouldn't reveal, but I know that of some of my friends. But also there's studies about these things. Anyway, Mad Merc, go ahead.
I think what this is coming down to is that the scholastics here are actually offering a practical solution to the problem of charity and being a good Christian and having good morals while still living in a free market and not using force. Simply declaring something to be solved or declaring that this should be done doesn't solve the issue.
Right.
This is often the huge problem of government, is that it thinks it's doing something when it's at best not doing anything, and at worst making it at worse. The situation and the decrees have unintended consequences, whereas if you are charitable, if you use your properly gotten gains, legally gotten gains, in charitable ways to help your fellow man, that's often more effective because you actually keep a track of the money and you can actually see where it's going, and you can decide whether a cause is actually worthy rather than just fueling some sort of bad project. Again, this comes down to, I know everyone, and I get this may be a mischaracterization, but I know everyone wants to be the super chat and say, yeah, whatever, we're just going to deal with that. But there are certain realities here that say, well, you can't just decree it away. You can't just shrug it off. There are things here that are bigger than you or I. And unfortunately, it's actually an emotional response to an issue rather than a logical one. To simply say, well, we're just going to do this and that'll solve the problem. Well, just have a step back and look at it for a second. Right.
I think what the scholastics show us here, and economists, the greatest economists in general, is that you don't throw your mind out to, we're rational. God made us rational for a reason, right? You don't throw your mind out when it turns to helping people. Your heart moves you. That's appropriate. That's correct. That's good. Your heart moves you to see someone in need. So you help them, right? And you help them in a way that truly is beneficial. And you use your mind to help you guide you in that way, so that you're not doing something that actually hurts them, right? Like, I feel so sorry for this alcoholic. I'm gonna go in the liquor store and buy him some liquor. Well, not sure you're really helping him,
Yeah.
Right?
Just to address something in the chat, charity doesn't always translate to good. Look at the LGBT lobby. Agreed, but the point is that you choose where your money goes for a charitable cause. You actually have control of it, whereas if someone at the point of a sword takes your money and then redistributes it on a basis of what they choose, then you have less control over it. The whole point is that you have control over and how it's done, which makes it more efficient and better for society.
I would also point out that great speech by Paul Gottfried I keep pointing to. What is it? Political correctness is political, or something like that. Anyway, he makes this great point that all these lobbies that are pushing for all this horrible stuff that's going on, this is not necessarily driven by private charity. He points out how deeply the state is complicit in all this stuff. It's being driven by taxes, tax money, which is used. The government will literally give money to somebody so that it can lobby the government for them to give more money to them, so on and so forth. So all those lobbies you're suspicious of, scratch the surface a little bit, follow the money. I think you'll find some interesting things. Okay, let's wrap this article up and cover 300 more years of economics. Profits. The schoolmen recognized the biblical teaching that having profits or any other earthly goal as an ultimate or final goal made that goal an idol, incorrectly placed above the Lord. But Thomas Aquinas recognized that profits are an appropriate immediate goal for business. So, not an ultimate spiritual goal, right? But an immediate goal. St. Antonio put it this way: as every agent acts to attain an end, the man who works in agriculture, in wool, in industrial and other similar activities, the immediate end he pursues is gain and profit. Aquinas mentioned some of the good motives that justify a pursuit of profit, like providing for your family, helping the poor, being compensated for your work, and filling an essential need. Yeah, I wish more people would think this way, right? People are like, oh, they're just greedy. They just want profits. It's like, well, maybe they're going to use the profits to feed their 8 kids, say. Let's imagine. Okay, concluding this. The Scholastics demonstrated that a concern for the poor and for mercy on the unfortunate does not require spurning the market. In fact, it was these very concerns that led them to study carefully the nature of property and market exchange. They found that the market is a powerful institution for improving the lot of the common worker, and respect for private property provides opportunities for charity. They had nothing but contempt for those who used government privilege to violently interfere with the market for their personal gain. One can only hope that the clergymen of today will cease their war on the market and learn that compassion is made more effective when grounded in economic truth. Okay, so I have just shared the link to Chaffwin's book, Faith and Liberty, The Economic Thought of the Late Scholastics. As I recall, I hope this got you intrigued. As I recall, it was not difficult reading at all. Chaffwin did a fabulous job of synthesizing a ton of the Scholastics. I don't think it's even that long. In fact, let me just look real quick on Amazon. 176 pages. This is light bedtime reading for our audience. So really recommend that book to you. Okay, now let's rock on, because in about 30 minutes, I'm going to do 300 more years. But I wanted to focus on the Scholastics because most of you probably had never even heard of them. Okay, so
we got 10 minutes every century. Let's do this.
Right. So jumping forward to the French, in the title I talked about an Irishman in France. I was referring to Richard Cantillon. Richard Cantillon, I suppose Cantillon was his name in Ireland. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just going to use the French pronunciation because he's associated with France. He immigrated to France and became a prominent, I think, a banker. Anyway, I could tell you a lot of biographical stuff about Cantillon. Mark Thornton at the Mises Institute, who I was so pleased to see again, was showing us a painting that he found that he pretty much is sure is a painting of Cantillon. Anyway, it was really cool. So key thing from Cantillon is an essay on economic theory. The only thing. It is, here, let me get to where I can see there we go. It is right here. I'll put a link to it in just a moment. I'll try the French. Again, I'm not great at French. Essai sur la nature du commerce en général. The essay on commerce, on the nature of commerce in general. Let's see. I guess I'll take this down for
catchy title.
Yes. Let's see. Yeah, I'm going to just take the screen down for just a moment. Okay. So Cantillon wrote this treatise in 1730, but there were strict censorship laws in France at the time, in the first half of the 18th century. So it wasn't published until 1755, but it circulated and was influential, we believe, on David Hume, and we know that it was on Adam Smith because Cantillon is one of the few authors that he actually cites explicitly in Wealth of Nations. Anyway, not influential enough, unfortunately. But let me give you a little taste of Cantillon. So in chapter 7 of book 2, more on the increase and decrease in the quantity of money in a state, he introduces what has become known as the Cantillon effects. And Cantillon's great. He focuses on the entrepreneur. He uses the term entrepreneur, the French term entrepreneur, in his treatise. He focuses on property. It's very grounded reading Cantillon. It's not ethereal. It's very grounded in people speculating, doing things, working the land. He seemed like a very practical man, I guess I could say, in how he thought about things. So he talks about what happens when money is introduced into a market. And he just is talking about, where gold, silver, and copper are extracted from the mines. He starts with that. The quantity of money, like that of all other commodities, determines its value against all other goods in the bargaining process of the marketplace. So, more money means that the money is going to be worth a little bit less money, it's going to be worth a little bit more, right? Standard quantity theory of money. But he memorably goes beyond that, so much so that we've named something after Cantillon. He talks about England. He uses England as his example. And he says, let's assume that because of ambassadors and foreign travelers residing in England, a whole lot of them, I guess, as much money has been introduced into circulation as there was before. That is, the quantity of money doubles, okay? Now, the helicopter thing is like Milton Friedman saying, well, let's imagine that money drops on everyone, like right at the same time. And so therefore, there's neutral effect on the economy, right? Prices just double, but it doesn't like change who has what, But Cantillon thinks about this much more carefully. He says this money will pass first in the hands of various artisans. So he's thinking about like an ambassador, foreign traveler coming, right? So who gets the money first? First, it's going to be various artisans, servants, and others who have had a share in providing the transportation, amusements, and so forth for the foreigners. Then manufacturers, farmers, and other entrepreneurs will feel the effect of the increased money. And it'll increase market prices. Even the children of these entrepreneurs and artisans will enter into new expenditures. So he's following the money as it flows from the first spenders and the first receivers of the money out through the rest of the economy, right? With this abundance of money, their fathers will give them a little money for their petty pleasures. They will buy cakes and meat pies, etc. This new quantity of money will be distributed so that many who lived without using money before will now have some. I conclude from all this that by doubling the quantity of money in a state, the prices of products and merchandise are not always doubled. Why is that? He says the river, which runs and winds about in its bed, will not flow with double the speed when the amount of water is doubled. The change in relative prices introduced by the increased quantity of money in the state will depend on how this money is directed at consumption and circulation. No matter who obtains the new money, it will naturally increase consumption. However, this consumption will be greater or less according to circumstances. It will more or less be directed to certain kinds of commodities or merchandise, according to the judgment of those who acquire the money. So the prices are not going to be uniformly affected, right? It's going to be depends on who has the money, what they decide to do with it. Market prices will increase more for certain goods than for others, however abundant the money may be. And then I shared this with Academic Agent, just because it a light touch on protectionism of that period. He talks about wheat versus cattle and how he thinks the the price of wheat in England, the price of meat might triple, but the price of wheat might increase less than 1/4. Well, why does he use that example? Little historical note of interest. An ox weighing 800 pounds sells in Poland and Hungary for 2 or 3 ounces of silver, but commonly sells in the London market for more than 40. Do you know why? He was stating the price at the time in 1730 or whatever. Let me say that one more time. So an ox sold for 2 or 3 ounces of silver on the continent and 40 in London. That is a brutal price difference. Is that a market phenomenon? No, sir. He says in England, it is still permitted to import wheat from foreign countries, but not cattle. So that's some brutal protectionism. The English were being deprived, shall we say, by law.
Which hurt everyone.
Yeah, right.
It hurt. It hurt the farmers, and then we talk about the Cantillon effect of prices flowing down. Well, let's talk about the effect of the price of cattle flowing down. Right? It hurts the people who want meat. It hurts people who want milk. It hurts people who want grains to be to be plowed, because obviously at that point we didn't have industrialized machinery to the extent that we do today. So this has many effects on many different industries. So it's not just an isolation.
Okay, so to conclude, Cantillon says, I conclude that an increase of actual money in a state always causes an increase of consumption and a routine of greater expenditures. But the higher prices caused by this money does not affect all commodities and merchandise equally. Prices do not rise proportionally to the quantity of money. So when we refer to Cantillon effects, we mean that the economy is going to be changed by the injection of money. It's not going to leave the economy the way it was before the money was injected, with everybody, prices just a little bit higher. Yes, eventually the injection of money works its way through and the prices are higher. But meanwhile, things have been redistributed into the economy. Some people have more and some people have less. Some things have, some lines of production have been increased and some have been reduced, right? So that's the Cantillon effect, is that money isn't neutral, in short, and that it propagates from whoever gets it first. Who gets money first in our world? Well, the central banks hand it basically to defense contractors and the government and various friends of the government. It's basically people who are politically connected get it first. And this is really the reason we have the massive inequalities we have that the leftists are also concerned about. It really comes down to inflation and the Cantillon effects. Actually,
this is why we've been talking about the Cantillon effect within the financial markets, and it's spreading down to higher order goods and then to lower order goods at the beginning of the stream, and with all the money printing that's been going on, and as people open up, start to get out of lockdown. So this is still very, very much relevant to what we're doing today.
Okay, so next I want to talk about Turgot. Anne Robert Jacques Turgot, the Baron de Lorne. I have no idea how to pronounce that. 1727 to 1781. He actually wrote a number of things, short things here and there. He actually wrote a little treatise. It's like 57 pages long. Reflections on the Formation and Distribution of Wealth, 1766. And then he talks about his views on economic policy in something called In Praise of Gournay, 1759. I actually want to share from something else, which is his piece Value and Money, 1769, where he developed some value theory. And I wanted to give you a taste of Turgot, which I believe Turgot was the one that Rothbard thought was clearly one of the great geniuses of economics. He says his writings, they're so few, they're so scattered, and they're just amazingly brilliant, compressed bundles of economic insight and goodness. So let me give you a little taste from Value and Money. Okay, Turgot develops a value theory. This is from a paper of mine. Turgot develops a value theory even more explicitly in an unfinished paper written several years after the Reflections, his treatise, Value and Money in 1769. Here he begins with an individual in a sort of Robinson Crusoe isolation. The individual, even in isolation, is seen to have a set of preferences that are not measurable, but can be ordered. Now, quoting Turgot, let us consider this man as exerting his abilities on a single object only. He will seek after it, avoid it, or treat it with indifference. In the first case, he will find it good, and this relative goodness could, generally speaking, be called value. It would not be susceptible to measurement, and the thing which has value would not be evaluated. If the same man can choose between several objects suitable to his use, he will be able to prefer one to the other. So this is the important distinction that Austrians emphasize, that value is something we can talk about from an ordinal point of view. I prefer this first and this second, this third, this more than that, but not in a cardinal way. We can't measure. We can't say that I value this 5 times as much as I value that. That's not really how value works. Particularly insightful, Turgot views the isolated individual as having time as a fundamental cost and being in an exchange relationship with nature. So now Turgot. Each particular object of enjoyment costs him trouble, hardship, labor, and at the very least time. Nature alone supplies his wants, and already he has made a first bargain with her, in which he supplies nothing unless he pays for it by his labor, the use of his resources, and his time. Improving on his own earlier discussion in the Reflections, in which he talked about exchange being of equal values, Turgot here clearly describes the two-sided inequality of exchange. He says, at the moment of exchange, the one who, for example, gives 4 measures of corn for 5 armfuls of wood, without doubt prefers these 5 armfuls of wood to the 4 measures of corn. But for his part, the one who receives the 4 measures of corn also prefers them to the 5 armfuls of wood. Each would remain as he was if he did not find an interest, a personal profit in exchange. If, in his own mind, he did not consider what he receives worth more than what he gives. This might seem a small matter, but economics got derailed at certain points, thinking about value being equal. You only exchange because the value is equal. Turgot explains, no, that's not right. Correcting himself, in fact. That's not right. You exchange because the thing you're getting is worth more to you than the thing you're giving away. But it's true for the other person, right? So we call this double-sided inequality of exchange.
This was something that actually went all the way back to antiquity. We see this actually talked about by many Greek philosophers as to where value comes from and what two things are equal in value and how that's determined. They actually come up with some pretty funny things as to say, well, is this equal? Because people do trade for it. I encourage people to go and read that. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I do remember being quite amused by reading that.
Okay. I think that's all I'm going to point out from Turgot. Let's see.
Now, a quick question about Cantillon.
Okay. Yeah.
Quick question about Cantillon. Was he not the economic, not minister, but advisor to the king who helped set up the French colonies in America, which also got the French into a huge amount of debt?
Okay, well, there's John Law. I can't recite that history off the top of my head. There's something about John Law and Cantillon and the Mississippi bubble, and it's very
Mississippi bubble.
Yeah. Look up the Mississippi bubble. I think you'll find it interesting. By the way, I was just sharing with you all from a paper that's unpublished. I did it for a graduate class, The Birth of Political Economy in France and Scotland. So that exists. Okay, let's move on. Okay, Bastiat, a favorite. I love Bastiat. Here we go. Man. Yes, he's awesome. Let me... he's a great writer. That's not what I'm going to focus on, but just have to mention it. He's a great writer. I first learned about Bastiat in a class on satire, and because we read this very piece. A petition from the manufacturers of candles, tapers, lanterns, sticks, street lamps, snuffers, and extinguishers, and from producers of tallow, oil, resin, alcohol, and generally of everything connected with lighting, to the honorable members of the Chamber of Deputies in France. I just want to read the first 3 paragraphs, and I think it'll give you a flavor for it, and then I'll share the link. In fact, I'll share the link now. Oops, where am I? Sorry, window juggling. Here we go. Yeah, here's this piece. Highly recommended. First 3 paragraphs just to wet your beak here. You are on the right track, gentlemen. You reject abstract theories and have little regard for abundance and low prices. You concern yourselves mainly with the fate of the producer. You wish to free him from foreign competition. That is to reserve the domestic market for domestic industry. We come to offer you a wonderful opportunity for your, what shall we call it, your theory? No, nothing is more deceptive than theory. Your doctrine, your system, your principle. But you dislike doctrines. You have a horror of systems. As for principles, you deny that there are any in political economy. Therefore, we shall call it your practice. Your practice without theory and without principle. We are suffering from the ruinous competition of a rival who apparently works under conditions so far superior to our own for the production of light that he is flooding the domestic market with it at an incredibly low price. For the moment he appears, our sales cease, all the consumers turn to him, and a branch of French industry, whose ramifications are innumerable, is all at once reduced to complete stagnation. This rival, which is none other than the sun, is waging war on us so mercilessly, we suspect he is being stirred up against us by perfidious Albion. Excellent diplomacy nowadays, particularly because he has for that haughty island a respect that he does not show for us. Anyway, he goes on like that. It's amazing. Just had to give you a taste. And he has tons of writing like this. I mean, this is the most famous, the petition of the candle makers. It's the most famous, but there's lots of stuff along these lines. I want to turn to him not as a writer, but as a theorist, because he wrote with such clarity on economics that he inevitably ended up doing economic theorizing. And this is highlighted by Nicholas Snow on Mises.org. And he writes about the 3 stages of invention. The article is generally interesting. I share it with you in the chat. But let me just focus on this. So in Bastiat's Economic Harmonies, which was his, it says a great deal of his writing shows him in attack mode, like against protectionism, as with the petition. But Economic Harmonies is different. It was written as a positive case for how a market economy operates. He gets into talking about, this article is about Bastiat on patents. He says he doesn't write about patents, but if you look at what he writes about invention and other things he writes, you can see that he would make a strong case. You could put a strong case against patents together just using Bastiat. So I thought this was quite interesting. So in Economic Harmonies, Bastiat outlines the 3 stages that an invention goes through. In the first stage, the inventor is the only one with the knowledge of how the invention works, right? So the intellectual property, as we call it these days, is in his head, right? So the inventor is the only one who can produce it or work with others to initially produce it. The inventor is rewarded in that he can now charge a higher price than his labor would normally warrant under competition. So we're assuming an economically productive invention, right? I can now produce something better than someone else because I made an invention. Now, what's the second stage? The second stage is imitation. People gradually, although it could be rapid depending on what the invention is, figure out the new ideas and copy the innovation. There is a proven incentive for replicating the idea owing to the high returns already enjoyed by the first sellers, right? So people are like, as a result of this new competition entering the market, the price falls. So this guy starts reaping extra profits. Price sort of stays the same, right? Let's assume. But he's making more money because he's able to produce the good more efficiently with his invention. Now other people start using the invention. Now there's competition between them and the price starts to fall. Price competition on the now more efficiently produced good. Bastiat's third and final stage is when the idea becomes gratuitous, as he calls it. The idea is now widely known and enjoyed by all and has become tantamount to a gift from nature. We all know how to do this in this efficient way. And you could think of certain kinds of plows, right? Everybody knows how to do certain plows that 1,000 years ago nobody knew about, but now we just go to the store and buy one, right? No one thinks the idea of the plow is important. Anyway, he goes on to use these 3 stages of invention to discuss an attack on patents. Okay, so that's a little taste of Bastiat, both his great writing in attack mode and then his theorizing, which also, I don't know that we plumb the depths of what Bastiat has to offer us. As my title indicated, I'm not going to focus on British economics. Academic Agent actually is much better on this than I am. But I'll just quote what Rothbard said about Adam Smith as a sideswipe here. The problem with Adam Smith, is that he originated nothing that was true, and that whatever he originated was wrong. Okay, so moving on.
You can out for that entire quote.
Oh, okay. I'll say it one more time. So Murray Rothbard on Adam Smith. The problem is that he originated nothing that was true and that whatever he originated was wrong. I realize that I'm not on what I should be. Give me just a moment. I'm going to turn off my Wi-Fi.
Yeah, no, there was a huge lag spike. I don't know what happened there.
Okay. Well, when I'm on Wi-Fi, that happens sometimes. Hopefully you can hear me now, right?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm always on Wi-Fi. But anyway, okay, now I'm going to go into the Austrians. Any comments before I continue?
No, I think that's essentially correct. The good thing about Adam Smith is that he at least got the ball rolling when it came to inspiring people, at the very least, to go into economic theory. He was like while there was other people who talked about it, obviously Cantillon, Bastiat, and the Scholastics beforehand, Adam Smith really did have the wider attention that we all. Oh, hello. Well, I'll just finish my point, and hopefully Radcliffe comes back. Adam Smith had the attention that allowed people to take a further interest into economics. You back, Radlib? I see you in the chat.
Let's see. Can you hear me?
You're back.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Don't know what happened there.
Yeah, I'm having some glitchiness with my internet. I think it's actually, I'm thankful because it's actually generally not been an issue for doing the show. So this is rare. Okay, so next I want to talk about Karl Menger. He's the founder of the Austrian school with his book in 1871, Principles of Economics. He did some important work on methodology, which I'm not going to talk about, and he really laid the groundwork for what the Austrian school has accomplished since then, and he's rightly honored. I'm actually going to use a lecture by George Reisman that I had the good fortune to be in attendance at the Mises Institute from years ago that just blew my mind, and I want to do a whole show on this. It's called Environmentalism Refuted, from 2001, and you notice that, well, you wouldn't know necessarily, but that's Karl Menger. That's who the picture is, because he's going to draw from Menger specifically. And this whole lecture blew my mind. It was so great, and I want us to go over it on the show sometime. So I need to write down all these ideas. But anyway, here's what I want to focus on, though, which is to think about environmentalism. Reisman turns to Menger, his Principles of Economics, to talk about his theory of goods, what counts as an economic good. And this ends up being really key to, as he says, it's highly relevant to the critique of the environmentalists' two essential claims. But I'm not going to get into that. This is a teaser for us to cover this paper another time. I just want to give you a taste of how Menger thinks. How he breaks things down. And if it feels a little bit scholastic in flavor, there's a reason for that, which I'm not going to get into. Okay, so so the first aspect from Menger is his recognition that makes what would otherwise be mere things into goods is not the intrinsic properties of the things, but a man-made relationship between the physical properties of the things and the satisfaction of human needs or wants. So he describes 4 prerequisites, all of which must be simultaneously present in order for a thing to become a good, or as he often puts it, to have good character. So what are these 4 things? And he's drawing from Aristotle to some degree. Here, Menger is. So all 4 must be simultaneously present. So number 1, a human need. Number 2, this is a little bit long, such properties as render the thing capable of being brought into a causal connection with the satisfaction of this need. The thing can meet our need, maybe is a short way to say that. 3, human knowledge of this causal connection. Okay, so far we've got the need, we've got a thing that can meet the need. We know the thing can meet the need, we're not done. 4, command of the thing sufficient to direct it to the satisfaction of the need. So we could say we need energy. The sun has all the energy we need. We know that. All we need to do is, run a line up to the sun. Well, we got 1, 2, and 3, and we don't have number 4. we can't command the energy. I mean, we get, solar panels, right? But in terms of, tapping more directly into the sun's energy, we do not currently, with our technology, have a way to run a ship up close to the sun and tap that energy and send it over to Earth and have like limitless energy that we're tapping off the sun, right? So we don't have number 4. We don't have command of the thing sufficient to direct it to the satisfaction of the need. And I'll just show you what Riesemann does with this just a little bit more and then move on. So all this has immediate bearing on the subject of natural resources. It implies that the resources provided by nature, such as iron, aluminum, coal, petroleum, and so on, are by no means automatically goods. Their goods character must be created by man, by discovering knowledge of their respective properties that enable them to satisfy human needs, and then by establishing command over them, like mining, right? Mining down and getting the stuff, sufficient to direct them to the satisfaction of human needs. Now, he doesn't use the oil example, but yeah, okay. No, he does. Okay. So here's a concrete example of what he's talking about. An example concerning goods character being created only after the establishment of command sufficient to direct the resource provided by nature to the satisfaction of a human need would be the case of petroleum deposits, lying deeper than existing drilling equipment could go. As drilling equipment improved, command was established over deposits lying at greater and greater depths. Those deposits, to the extent that they were known, then became goods, which they had not been before. So we're talking about economic goods, right? Sure, oil, you know, at the center of the earth, we have the first three. Yeah, we know that oil could be useful to us. We have the need. We have the knowledge, right? Or it has the property. We have the knowledge of it, but we can't get a hold of the oil at the center of the earth or whatever, you know, too deep down. He says, similarly, for some years after the creation of the goods character of petroleum, those petroleum deposits containing a significant sulfur content were unusable for the production of petroleum products and were therefore not goods. Their goods character was created only when Rockefeller and Standard Oil developed the process of cracking petroleum molecules, which then made sulfurous deposits usable. Anyway, hopefully that gives you a teaser of where he's going with bringing up Menger's analysis of the nature of goods and how it helps us think about natural resources and therefore speaks to the concerns of environmentalists. Okay, I'm going to cover three more, but only one more in any depth. Next, I want to talk about Bohm-Bawerk, who was a student of Menger. He wrote History and Critique of Interest Theories. That's actually what I'm going to draw from, courtesy of Bob Murphy here. Oh, that's Bohm-Bawerk, pictured on the screen now. He also wrote Karl Marx and the Completion of His System, for some reason often translated. It's in German. Here, I can butcher lots of languages today. Zum Abschluss des Marxischen Systems. I put that into Google Translate and got at the end of the Marxian system. For some reason, it's published as Karl Marx in the close of his system, but I think that's ambiguous. It doesn't make clear what he's saying. He means that Karl Marx had published the last of, or he'd either died or he'd published the last of Das Kapital or both. Anyway, whatever. He says, we've got his system and now we're going to critique it. That's the point of the book. And so Bohm-Bawerk gave one of the first really serious economic critiques of Marx. But I actually want to draw from Bob Murphy and Bohm-Bawerk's critique of the exploitation theory of interest. So he wrote a book, before he wrote his own book on the phenomenon of interest, he wrote a volume one was just critiquing other theories. So it's called History and Critique of Interest Theories. And he critiques one that should be of special interest to us. There's various ones that Bob's written about, in fact, the naive productivity theory of interest, the abstinence theory of interest. But in this, we want to talk about what Bohm-Bawerk calls the exploitation theory of interest, which really is the socialist theory of interest. Okay. And so he quotes an advocate of this theory, Rothbard, who, based on the labor theory of value, talks about how interest comes from exploitation. So Rothbard, this is who Bohm-Bawerk's going to critique, right? There can be no income except as it is the result of labor. An excess of proceeds over labor costs depends on two indispensable prerequisites. There can be no surplus proceeds unless the labor at least produces more than is required for the continuation of the labor. That is, there's this subsistence wages, right? You got to make more than, the labor needs to produce more than subsistence wages for there to be any extra, right? Second, there can be no surplus proceeds unless institutions exist which deprive the workers of this margin in whole or in part and divert it to others who do not work themselves. For the workers are, in the nature of things, in possession of their product at the outset. That is, the worker does something, and the value he produces, like, belongs to him, and then somebody else, well, Rothbard says, this margin is wrested in whole or in part from the workers, and is diverted to others, which is the result of legalistic factors. So if we had real justice, real socialism or whatever, then the laborer would create value. He'd reap all that value, and there wouldn't be anything left over for, the capitalist or the moneylender or whatever. And so he argues, just as law has from the beginning been in coalition with power, so in this instance, this diversion takes place only by the continued exercise of compulsion. So this is the socialist view, right, at its heart. It's that the workers are exploited. They produce more value than they need to live on, and that's skimmed off through coercion, and that's how the capitalists live off them, right? So Bohm-Bawerk makes two critiques. One, Murphy doesn't go into, and we won't here, which is he critiques the labor theory of value. It is simply not true that goods derive their value from the total labor used in their production. And he talks about this, but this is covered in other places, so we'll skip it and get onto something, and you probably have heard of it. Let's do something maybe you haven't heard of. So after demolishing the labor theory of value, Bohm-Bawerk writes, in order not to draw undue advantage from Rothbard's first error, Bohm-Bawerk's a gentleman, right? I shall, for the remaining pages of this investigation, frame all my presuppositions in such a way as to eliminate completely all the consequences of that error. I shall assume that all goods are produced only by the cooperation of labor and free forces of nature, without the intervention of natural material resources having exchanged value. In other words, says Bohm-Bawerk will now proceed to show that even if we restrict ourselves to cases where labor is the only scarce resource used in the production of a certain good, the exploitation theory is still faulty. Okay, so what they're saying is we talk about production involving land and labor, we're going to eliminate the land, and we're going to say, in this case, the value completely is just, we're going to imagine, the values completely comes from labor, okay? And he says, and still, we're going to show how this theory doesn't work. First, he concedes the socialist maxim. He, too, agrees that the workers ought to get paid the full product of their labor. How can Bohm-Bawerk win when he's granted that? He said, yep, you're right. They should get the full product of what they do, okay? The completely just proposition that the worker is to receive the entire value of his product can be reasonably interpreted to mean either that he is to receive the full present value of his product now, or that he is to get the entire future value in the future. But Rothbard and the socialists interpret it to mean that the worker is to receive the entire future value of his product now. Okay, so let's walk through this. What Bohm-Bawerk has done is he's introduced time. And why is that? Because he understands from what interest comes. Once we recognize that present goods are more valuable than future goods, that people would prefer $1,000 or a pizza pie today rather than $1,000 or a pizza pie in 50 years, this ambiguity in the exploitation doctrine renders it completely false. The ambiguity, that is, between present and future. The explanation for Rothbard's surplus proceeds, the fact that the capitalist gets more by selling the product to consumers than the total amount he paid to workers in producing it, is not exploitation, but rather that the workers were paid before the final product could be sold to consumers. It is the time difference that explains the interest income earned by capitalists. Okay, so, okay, we're going to get to it. I'm not sure I'm going to go through the whole argument here. I think you've got sort of the central point that Bohm-Bawerk's making. Yeah, it's going to get more detailed than I want to get into today to walk through his example. But the way to understand it is this. The capitalist and the laborer are making a time trade, okay? The capitalist forwards the, capital goods and the loans, whatever's needed so that the production can be done right now. He's trading that present stuff for the future price of the product, right? The laborer is going the other way. The laborer is giving something, is getting something now. He's getting paid now, and he's trading off the value that this product will have in 5 years or whatever, if you follow. So capitalist, let's say, gives money now for the product later. The laborer produces the product now. Gets paid now in exchange for this product, which will be sold later. I'm not sure I said that quite right, but you follow. It's the time factor that the socialists are not thinking of. They're looking at that final consumer price, and they're not thinking about the fact that the laborer didn't make it and hand it to somebody, right? They made it with tools provided by the capitalist, right? And then eventually it gets sold, but the laborer gets paid today. And crucially, coming back to the Scholastics point about bearing both the losses and the profits, the speculative aspect of this comes in as well, which is that, and this is not a point about interest, but just about the socialist argument. The speculative aspect comes into this as well. They say, oh, isn't this terrible? They're being exploited because the profit is going to, the capitalist, and the labor is just getting paid. Well, okay, but when the capitalist loses, and I've been in this situation, I've been in a company where they lost money, I still got paid, and they didn't come back to me and say, hey, that salary we paid you 5 months ago when you were working on this project that didn't end up making money, you need to give it all back to us, or you need to give 20% of it back to us because we lost 20% on the project, right? So the labor is getting really a double deal here. They're getting a hedge against uncertainty, and they're getting a hedge against time. They're trading against time and uncertainty by getting paid. So, they talk about how exploited the labor is. Well, as someone who works for the man, I'm pretty happy that whatever the stock price of the company I work for is, I still get my paycheck every 2 weeks and can feed my family, right? And that the project I'm working on, which won't be complete for 1.5 years because it's a complicated project, right? And so it won't be what we call RRG, ready for revenue generation, for 1.5 years. I still get my paycheck on Friday, right? Even though we're not going to make any money from this thing I'm working on for another 1.5 years. Somebody else is bearing that cost of time and the uncertainty. So really, it's not a bad trade-off, and the socialists are just wrong to talk about exploited labor. And Bohm-Bawerk really nails them on one aspect of this. Okay, so just about to round it up. I just am going to mention 2 more people. One, we've already done the job. Or, I'm not sure I shared that article. Let me share that article. There we go. One, we've already done the job, which is, where is it? Oh, crap. I don't have it. I had it. Sorry. I just wanted to share our previous show. Oh, that was it, wasn't it? Nope. That's this show. Okay. Anyway, I'll have to pull it up real quick. So we did a show on Mises's, a central contribution of Mises. And rather than go through that today, I'm just going to direct you to that to cover Mises. So let me share that and then talk about Mises briefly. Here we go. Okay, so Mises is a student of Bohm-Bawerk in turn. And he builds on his great work. And he critiques socialism, which is the thing that the previous show that I shared, by talking about the issue of economic calculation, that socialism does not explain how we're going to do economic calculation when the means of production are commonly owned or owned by the state or whatever. And he explains in that paper, which we went through in detail, why this is just absolutely a killer for socialism. It means socialism's impossible, and some other things as well. He also is really the root of the Austrian theory of the business cycle in his book, The Theory of Money and Credit, which Hayek got the Nobel Prize for shortly after Mises died. They could easily have won that together if he had still been alive at the time. Some people think the timing was not coincidental, that they waited till Mises died. So he developed the Austrian theory of the business cycle and just so much more. In particular, he wrote the great treatise Human Action, the English version of which was 1949. He'd written an earlier treatise in Germany in the middle of the war, so that didn't go anywhere. But he wrote it again in English in 1949, had to learn another language to do it. And it's brilliant. And one of the things they do at the Mises Institute, which I've been part of, is they do it's called the Rothbard Graduate Seminar, and they'll just spend a week going through Human Action, say, chapter by chapter, lectures on it. You read it ahead of time, and they lecture through it. You can discuss it, and it's great. It's a graduate level seminar, which I've done. Similarly, I've done a seminar at the Mises Institute on Murray Rothbard's Man, Economy, and State, published just 13 years later in 1962. So the two great treatises that we look to, economic treatises of the Austrian school, were published really close to each other. But they're kind of different in a way. Human Action is a little more philosophical, I guess you could say, especially the first 100 pages or so. Man, Economy, and State was started as a textbook project, and it just sort of grew, which tended to happen with Rothbard's projects, and became an epic treatise where he made some genuine contributions. In particular, and this is the final economic contribution I'll cover, he explained why monopoly is impossible on the free market, and monopoly is always the product of coercive intervention. And I'm not going to try to explain that right now. I was hoping I could find a good article to walk it through. Yeah, this is not bad on that topic by Tom DiLorenzo, future guest of the show. I just spoke to him a month ago. Yeah, I think he must talk about Rothbard's. Yeah. Right. So he knocks down, let me just give a taste of this. So the so-called limited space monopoly argument for franchise monopolies is a red herring. For how many firms will be profitable in any line of production is an institutional question, depends on such concrete data as the degree of consumer demand, the type of product sold, the physical productivity of the processes, the supply and pricing of factors, the forecasting of entrepreneurs, etc. Spatial limitations may be unimportant. And he says, further, even if spatial limitations do allow only one firm to operate in a particular geographical market, that does not necessitate monopoly, for monopoly is a meaningless appellation unless monopoly price is achieved, and all prices on a free market are competitive. Only government intervention can generate monopolistic prices. Now, that might sound a little bit of a light critique, but when you go through this section in Man, Economy, and State, he really walks you through why we cannot identify any such thing as a monopoly price on the free market. The reason why this is significant is that even Mises talked about monopoly, the possibility of monopoly on the free market, but Rothbard really destroyed that in his theoretical work there, so that we understand monopoly in the way the classical liberals meant it. It meant there was a government privilege. Okay, so Scholastics, some French writing, economists who wrote in French, Cantillon, Turgot, Bastiat, then the Austrians, Menger, Bohm-Bawerk, Mises, Rothbard. I don't think that's a bad, I mean, I'd be curious what Joe Salerno would say, but I don't think that's a bad overview of some of the essential players in good economic theory. There are other big names that are probably, bigger, like not just Adam Smith, but Milton Friedman or somebody like that, that would be considered big names in mainstream economics, but I think they're wrong. And the economic thinkers I've tried to introduce you to today is really the main line of good economic thought. And if you read these guys, they're as we saw with the Scholastics, right? Their words ring true all these hundreds of years later. It absolutely fits what we see in real life. Okay, so I think we can wrap it up, except just in case anyone missed it, to mention the plan for next week. Econ Chat. I'm going to have a guest on who will give us insight on gold and Bitcoin from a paper that he gave at the Mises Institute that I was quite impressed by. Mad Mercenary won't be with us next week because of a conflict, but you can catch him, and should, on Academic Agent's Cigar Stream with Apostolic Majesty, and they'll be covering the Spanish Civil War. And then I'll just mention that we are particularly appreciative of folks who support us on Subscribestar. I'll pop that into the chat here. Each subscriber makes a huge difference, and it's not that big of a commitment. It's $5 a month. But that means we have a regular flow of funds that we can use to cover some of the costs that we're coming up with here. So anything else, Mad Merc, before we wrap it up?
No.
Okay, I sent my wife to take the kids to karate so I could finish our Whirlwind tour. So maybe not quite as fast as I was hoping, but I think covered a lot of ground there. So, all right, looking forward to some exciting stuff next week on the show, and then with Mad Merc's guest appearance on Cigar Stream. So that'll be really cool. I love the Cigar Stream myself. That's one of the ones I really try to never miss. Well, I often miss it, but I try to catch up with it if I'm busy. So we have super chats potentially, don't we? Or I know we do. Sorry, forgetting how to do a YouTube show. Let me just pull those up real quick, and let's take some time on those. Okay, well, the first super chat, I think, fair to say, knocked out of the park, because he asked to. He recommended Chaffwin's book and my articles reviewing Chaffwin's book, and we just went through them. So, so thank you, Based Batusai. Aquila Fotia says Ave Rex Luna. Thank you. Patricia Scricchili says, hi, love the show, guys. I wanted to ask, what are the best financial news outlets you'd recommend reading? Do you have any strong opinions on that, Mad Merc? I don't really read the financial press.
I'm not a big reader of financial press. It's really, you have to take each article individually, I think, and try and weigh up who's writing it and what they're writing about, whether it's their strong suit.
Yeah.
I think there are a couple
we don't really, what you're saying, let me just make explicit what you're saying. We don't really have an outlet that is going to be consistently good in their economic theory and in their approach to things. Just don't even think about that. It's more like find good writers, right?
Right.
Individuals.
I think Zero Hedge has some good stuff out there. They've been doing some good stuff.
Yeah.
Who is I forget now. We had a young man on who used to write who I believe he still does, the first China episode, or some of the first China episodes we did. I'll try and put that in the chat later. I'll put that in the comments. I'll try and find who that is, but that's another one that I check out. Seb was his name, I believe. Seb's Daily Economic Report or something. We had him on the show.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I remember that. Right. Yeah, that's a good one.
Polish man.
Yep.
What's another one? Shadow Stat is another one for those who want to have some statistics at hand, although you do have to pay for that.
I think a lot of the good economic writing is sometimes not for free. I've noticed.
Yes.
Grant's Interest Rate Observer had a good friend at the Mises Institute writing for it for years.
Obviously, Mises Institute. Obviously, Mises.org is something that we use, although they're more economics focused rather than financial news. Yeah,
they're not going to cover. I mean, they will now and again cover something that counts as financial news, but that's not like their steady beat. So they're not exactly a competitor to the Financial Times or something, right?
No, they're not a Bloomberg or anything. Again, take it writer by writer, especially for the major ones like Reuters, Bloomberg, Yahoo Financial News.
Right.
It's you have to just assess on your own grounds.
Yeah, that would be nice to know. I see a number of people in the comments commenting on Zero Hedge. that they find some good stuff there. Okay, here's one more super chat slipped in. Ant Burger, money for the upcoming competition prizes. Yes, we want to have some good prizes this year. So excited about that. And as Mad Merc said, that's looking good. If you want to be part of that, join our Discord, which is in the link, where we have discussion and voice chat sometimes, and competition prize. Or I'm sorry, competition with real prizes. Last year we gave away a total of 6 silver coins to 3 winners. A first, second, and third prize to 3 different winners. So not bad, eh? For a little channel, a little growing channel here, I think we do pretty good with that kind of thing. All right, is there anything else to mention? I think we did our super chats. Where's my other list to remind me of things? Yeah, just the Discord, and yeah, one last thing I'll mention is the merch store. Here we go. Yeah, there's the link to the merch store. Thanks, Hamper. Where there's some great merchandise designed by Mad Merc, and they're really cool designs. My wife made some money doing a stream on our show on the channel, and immediately used some of it to buy one of Mad Merc's designs, which I see her wearing regularly. So it's really awesome. Okay, well, I think we're done. Thanks, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.